Hello, my dearest listeners, and welcome back to The Unlit Path. Tonight, we travel to a place forgotten by the highways and headlines, a town nestled by a river as dark and deep as the secrets it keeps. This is a story about a crime that was buried, not by dirt and time, but by the deliberate, collective silence of a community. Before we take our first step into the shadows of Havenwood, I want to thank you for walking these paths with me. Your support is the lantern that lights the way. If you find value in these stories that explore the darker corners of human nature, please consider subscribing to the channel and turning on notifications. Truly makes a world of difference. Now, take a deep breath of the damp, river air. Listen to the whispers on the wind. We are about to uncover the killing no one spoke of. Elias Thorne arrived in Havenwood on a Tuesday, under a sky the color of a fresh bruise. The town revealed itself reluctantly, emerging from a dense fog that clung to the ancient pines lining the road. It was a place that felt perpetually damp, as though the sullen, black water of the Umber River had seeped into the very soil and foundations of the clapboard houses. Elias's car, a testament to his dwindling savings, coughed and sputtered as he parked it in front of the only motel, a sad, peeling structure called the River's Rest. The name felt less like an invitation and more like a warning. He wasn't here for a story, not really. Not the kind that wins awards and resurrects a career. He was here because of a ghost. 6 months ago, his life had imploded. A high-profile investigative piece he'd written for the New York Sentinel had been based on a source who turned out to be a fabulist. The retraction had been brutal, his dismissal swift. Now, Elias was a pariah, a journalist who had committed the cardinal sin of getting it wrong. He was haunted by the ghost of his own reputation. Then the email had arrived, anonymous and cryptic. It was just a few lines, sent from a public library computer 2 states away. They say Lily Marsh drowned in the Umber River. They say it was an accident. They lie. Havenwood has a talent for drowning things, especially the truth. Attached was a faded newspaper clipping, a small 2-inch column reporting the death of a 10-year-old girl a year prior. Cause of death: accidental drowning. Case closed. Something in the message resonated with the hollowed-out part of Elias's soul. Maybe it was the chance to investigate something real, something elemental, far from the polished lies of politicians and CEOs. Or maybe it was because he, too, knew something about the ghosts of children. His own son, lost to a fever 8 years ago, was a constant, aching presence. He understood the profound injustice of a life cut short. The wall of silence hit him the moment he walked into the town's only diner. The low hum of conversation didn't just stop. It was surgically excised from the air. Every eye in the room, the weathered fisherman, the tired-looking waitress, the old men nursing cups of coffee, turned to him. He was an outsider, a foreign object, and the collective stare was as solid and unwelcoming as a locked door. His first official stop was the sheriff's office. Sheriff Brody was a thick, barrel-chested man whose uniform seemed a size too small for his simmering resentment. His office smelled of stale coffee and damp wool. "Don't have much to tell you," Brody said, leaning back in his chair until it groaned in protest. He didn't bother to look at the small press pass Elias offered. It was a tragic accident. Little Lily was playing by the river, where she shouldn't have been. She slipped on the mossy rocks, hit her head. The river did the rest. We found her a mile downstream a day later. Case closed. "Were there any witnesses?" Elias asked, his pen poised over his notepad. Brody's eyes narrowed. "This is a small town, Mr. Thorne. Not a lot of folks just hanging around the old mill on a weekday evening. Especially not a 10-year-old girl on her own." "So she was alone?" "That's the long and short of it," the sheriff said, his tone making it clear the conversation was over. "My advice? Get back in your car and find a story somewhere else. There's nothing for you here but bad weather and sad memories." His next visit was to the girl's mother, Sarah Marsh. She lived in a small, tidy house at the edge of town, a place that seemed to be holding its breath. The garden was immaculate, but the windows were dark. Sarah was a pale, fragile woman with eyes that had forgotten how to cry. She moved through her home as if she were a ghost in it, tidying things that were already tidy, her hands never still. She initially refused to speak to him, but Elias was persistent, gentle. He spoke not as a journalist, but as a father who understood loss. Finally, she relented, letting him into a living room that was a shrine to her daughter. Lily's drawings, vibrant and full of life, were taped to the walls. "They told me she was careless," Sarah whispered, her voice raspy from disuse. She clutched a worn teddy bear to her chest. Lily was never careless. She was meticulous. She was quiet, and she noticed everything. She was scared of the river. She used to say it whispered things at night. She wouldn't have gone near the mill alone. "Did you tell the sheriff this?" A flicker of something fiercer passed through her eyes. "Sheriff Brody. He was very kind. He said it was best not to dwell. He said the town was grieving with me and that we all needed to heal. We all needed to heal." It was a strange choice of words. It sounded rehearsed, a line fed to her, a sedative to quiet her questions. Elias spent the next 2 days wandering Havenwood, a notebook in his pocket and a growing sense of dread in his stomach. The silence was an active, malevolent force. When he approached people, they would turn away, their faces closing like fists. He'd ask about Lily Marsh, and they would suddenly remember an urgent appointment, or simply shake their heads and walk away. He was a leper, and his questions were the disease. The town, he learned, was dominated by one family, the Blackwoods. They owned the defunct timber mill that had once been the town's lifeblood, and they still owned most of the land and businesses. Their family home was a Gothic mansion on a hill that looked down on Havenwood, both geographically and metaphorically. The current patriarch, Arthur Blackwood, was a man spoken of in hushed, reverential tones. His son, Caleb, a young man of about 19, was spoken of in a different way with fear. On his 3rd day, defeated and ready to heed Sheriff Brody's advice, Elias found a note slipped under his motel room door. It was written in a shaky, almost spidery hand on a torn piece of paper. She didn't slip. She was given to the river. "Look by the weeping willow, where the water runs blackest." The mill knows. The hair on Elias's arms stood up. Given to the river. The phrase was poetic and chilling. He grabbed his coat and his camera and headed for the old mill as dusk began to bleed across the sky. The mill was a skeletal ruin on the riverbank, its water wheel frozen with rust, its windows like vacant eyes. The air here was heavy, thick with the smell of decay and wet earth. He found the weeping willow mentioned in the note, its long branches trailing in the dark, swirling water like skeletal fingers. The ground beneath it was a mess of tangled roots and slick, moss-covered stones. He spent an hour searching, his shoes sinking into the mud, the river whispering its cold, incessant song beside him. He found nothing but river-smoothed stones and rotting leaves. Disappointment soured in his gut. He was chasing phantoms, led on by a cruel prankster. As he turned to leave, his foot caught on a root and he stumbled, his hand shooting out to break his fall. His fingers plunged into the soft, loamy earth near the base of the tree. He felt something small and hard. He dug it out of the mud. It was a small, intricately carved wooden bird, no bigger than his thumb. One of its wings was broken off. It was clearly handmade, a child's toy or a piece from a larger set. He wiped the mud from it. On the underside, almost completely faded, were 2 initials. C.B. Elias stared at the bird, his heart starting to pound a heavy, determined rhythm against his ribs. C.B. Caleb Blackwood. It wasn't proof of anything, not legally, but it was a crack in the wall of silence. It was a voice, a whisper from the mud, and it told him that the anonymous note was right. He looked back at the town, its lights just beginning to flicker on against the encroaching darkness. He could feel the weight of its secrets, the pressure of its silence. They had drowned the truth, but a piece of it had just washed up at his feet. And Elias Thorne, the disgraced journalist with nothing left to lose, knew he would not leave until he had pulled the rest of it from the black, whispering water of the Umber River. He had his story, More than that, he had a purpose. He would give a voice back to the girl the river had taken, no matter what it cost him. Clutching the small wooden bird, Elias felt a shift in the very air around him. The oppressive gloom of Havenwood no longer felt like a passive force of nature. It felt like a curated, actively maintained prison. The bird was a key, but he had no idea what lock it fit. His first instinct was to march into Sheriff Brody's office and demand answers, but he knew that would be a fool's errand. The bird would disappear into an evidence locker, and Elias would likely find himself escorted to the town line, or worse. He needed leverage. He needed context. The initials CB were a powerful lead, but in a town that communicated in closed-off expressions and turned backs, accusing the son of the most powerful family was tantamount to declaring war. His investigation changed tactics. He was no longer just asking about Lily Marsh. He was trying to understand the town itself. He spent hours in the dusty, neglected town hall archives, poring over old maps and property deeds. The name Blackwood was everywhere, a spiderweb of ownership and influence that stretched back generations. They had built the town, employed the town, and Elias was beginning to suspect they held the town in a state of perpetual fear. He tried to learn more about Caleb Blackwood. In the diner, feigning a casual interest, he mentioned the name to the weary-eyed waitress, a woman named Martha. For a moment, her professional indifference cracked. A shadow of something dark and unpleasant crossed her face. "He's Arthur Blackwood's boy," she said, her voice dropping so low Elias had to lean in to hear. "Keeps to himself, mostly. Him and his friends. They have the run of the place." She looked around nervously, as if the very name could summon him. Best to just stay out of his way. The fear was palpable. It wasn't just the respect owed to the town's founding family. It was something more personal, more visceral. Elias decided his next stop should be Sarah Marsh. He hated to disturb her grief again, but the bird was a tangible link to the last moments of her daughter's life. He found her in the garden, listlessly pulling weeds that weren't there. He showed her the small, muddy object. She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Her eyes, which had been so dull and lifeless, suddenly filled with a sharp, painful light. "Where did you find this?" she whispered, taking the bird from his palm with a trembling hand. "By the old mill, near a weeping willow tree," Elias said gently. "It was Lily's," Sarah said, tears finally tracing paths down her pale cheeks. "It was part of her treasure collection. She found it in the woods a few weeks before she died. She loved it. She said it was her little secret keeper." Then she paused, her brow furrowing in concentration. "But the initials. She told me who made it. It was from the school's art fair the year before. All the older kids had to do a woodworking project. Caleb Blackwood made a whole set of these. A mobile of woodland birds. One of them must have broken off and gotten lost. The connection was now concrete. Caleb Blackwood's creation was in Lily Marsh's possession, found at the site of her death. It wasn't a weapon, but it was a link, a thread. His quiet investigation had not gone unnoticed. As he left Sarah Marsh's house, a black, menacing pickup truck, the kind of vehicle built for intimidation, screeched to a halt beside him. Caleb Blackwood was behind the wheel. He was handsome in a cruel, sharp-edged way, with his father's aristocratic features and eyes that were cold and empty. Two of his friends, beefy and silent, were in the cab with him. "You're the reporter, right?" Caleb said, his voice a low, arrogant drawl. He didn't wait for an answer. "You're asking a lot of questions, stirring things up. This town doesn't like to be stirred." "A little girl is dead," Elias said, his voice steady despite the knot of fear in his stomach. "I think that's worth stirring things up for." Caleb's smile was a thin, humorless slash. "She slipped. End of story. Maybe you should slip on out of town before you have an accident, too. The river takes what it wants." He gunned the engine, the roar a punctuation mark to his threat, and sped off, leaving Elias in a cloud of dust and exhaust. The threat galvanized Elias. He knew he was close to something the Blackwoods were desperate to keep buried. But the town's silence was a fortress. He needed to find a dissident, someone who hated the Blackwoods more than they feared them. His search led him to Alara, a woman who lived in a secluded cabin deep in the woods that bordered the river. The townspeople referred to her as the River Witch, a recluse who sold herbal remedies and was treated with a mixture of fear and scorn. She was a woman who lived outside the town's suffocating social contract. It took him 2 days to get her to speak to him. She met him at her door with a shotgun held loosely in her arms, her face a roadmap of hardship, her eyes sharp and intelligent. He didn't present himself as a journalist. He simply said, "I think something happened to Lily Marsh and no one will talk about it." He sat on her porch for hours, talking about his own loss, about the injustice of a stolen life, until she finally saw that his quest was genuine. Her story, when it came, was a torrent, a release of pressure that had been building for a year. "I saw her that night," Alara said, her voice a low, raspy whisper. "I was gathering herbs by the river, further downstream. I saw the lights first, lanterns up at the old mill. It was the hush." "The hush?" Elias asked. "A town secret," she explained, her lips twisting in distaste. "A stupid tradition. Every year, on the first autumn full moon, the older kids, the ones about to graduate, go up to the mill. The Blackwoods started it generations ago. A rite of passage. They drink, they tell stories, they dare each other to swim in the black water. It's all supposed to be a secret, a way of facing the river's spirit. It's just an excuse for the rich kids to run wild where no one can see them." The pieces began to fall into place with sickening clarity. Lily hadn't been there alone. She had stumbled upon this secret rite. "Caleb was there," Alara continued, her eyes fixed on the distant, dark line of the river. "He was always the king of it. I saw little Lily. She wasn't part of it. She was hiding in the shadows, watching them. Then I saw her go up to Caleb. They were arguing. I was too far away to hear the words, but their bodies were angry. He was jabbing his finger at her, and she was standing her ground. It's the Blackwoods, you understand? And Brody is their man. What could I do? A crazy old woman against them? They would have said I was lying. They would have ruined me." This was it. The entire rotten core of the story, laid bare. It wasn't a premeditated murder. It was something messier, uglier. A moment of drunken rage, an accident born of arrogance, and a town-wide conspiracy to cover it up, all to protect a pathetic, secret tradition and the golden boy of the Blackwood clan. The silence wasn't just about protecting a killer. It was about protecting themselves, their traditions, their entire way of life. Armed with this, Elias felt a surge of righteous fury. He went back to town after dark, his mind racing. He had a witness. It was a start. He was walking back to his motel, his head down, planning his next move, when the black pickup truck swerved out of a side alley, its headlights blinding him. Caleb and his 2 friends piled out before the truck had even stopped moving. There were no words this time, no threats. The first punch caught Elias in the stomach, knocking the wind out of him. They dragged him into the alley, their movements brutally efficient. The beating was savage, impersonal. It was a message delivered with fists and steel-toed boots. As he lay on the cold, wet asphalt, tasting blood, his ribs screaming in protest, Caleb leaned down, his face a mask of cold fury. "I told you to leave," he hissed. "Some people have to learn the hard way. The next time we'll let the river teach you." They left him there, crumpled and broken in the darkness. For a long time, all he could do was lie there, listening to the distant, mocking whisper of the Umber River. He had found the roots of the silence, but in doing so, he had become entangled in them. They were choking him, trying to pull him down into the same darkness that had swallowed Lily Marsh. He closed his eyes, the pain washing over him, and for the first time since arriving, he felt a flicker of true despair. He had the story, but he was beginning to realize he might not live to tell it. Pain was the first thing that brought Elias back to consciousness. A deep, throbbing ache that seemed to emanate from his very bones. The second was the cold. The damp chill of the alley had seeped into him, leaving him stiff and shivering. He managed to push himself into a sitting position, his body screaming in protest. His face was sticky with drying blood, and he could feel the sharp, jagged edge of a broken rib with every breath. Caleb Blackwood's message had been received. He half crawled, half stumbled his way back to the river's rest. The night clerk, a pimply teenager, took one look at his battered face and quickly looked away, suddenly fascinated by something on his computer screen. Even here, the silence, the deliberate act of not seeing, was the default setting. Elias made it to his room, locking the flimsy door behind him, and collapsed onto the bed. Lying there in the darkness, with the ghost of his own son and the ghost of Lily Marsh for company, Elias understood the true nature of the battle he was fighting. He couldn't win with force. He couldn't win by appealing to a justice system that was owned and operated by the Blackwoods. He had tried to knock down the wall of silence brick by brick, and the wall had fallen on him. The only way to win was to make the people inside the walls tear them down themselves. He had to do more than just expose the crime. He had to break the spell that held Havenwood in its thrall. His first visitor the next morning was not the police, but Sarah Marsh. The motel clerk, in a rare act of either courage or pity, must have called her. She gasped when she saw his face, her hands fluttering to her mouth. She brought a first aid kit and a thermos of hot tea, and tended to his wounds with a quiet, practiced efficiency that spoke of a life spent caring for others. "It was Caleb, wasn't it?" she asked, her voice devoid of surprise, filled only with a deep, resonating sorrow. Elias nodded, wincing as she dabbed antiseptic on a cut on his cheek. "He knows I spoke to Alara. He knows I'm close to the truth." Sarah finished her work and sat back, looking at him, her eyes clear for the first time since he'd met her. The fog of grief had been burned away by a slow-burning anger. "When Lily died," she said, her voice trembling with emotion, "Arthur Blackwood came to my house. He brought flowers. He told me the entire town mourned with me. He gave me a check, a large one. He called it a community gift, to help with expenses. He said the best way to honor Lily's memory was to find peace, to let the town heal." She looked at Elias's bruised and swollen face. "It wasn't a gift. It was a payment. It was the first stone in the wall they built around me, around the whole town. They paid for our silence. This was the moment." Elias knew it. He had to gamble everything on the one emotion he believed could be stronger than fear, a mother's love for her child. He pushed her. "Sarah," Elias said, his voice low and urgent. "That's what Alara saw. Caleb pushed her during an argument at the old mill. She fell and hit her head. It might have been an accident, a moment of stupidity and rage. But what they did after, the cover-up, the lies, the threats, that was not an accident. They chose to let your daughter's memory be a lie to protect their family, their secrets. They chose to silence a whole town rather than face the consequences." He watched her as the words sank in. He saw the sorrow in her eyes curdle into a hard, diamond-bright fury. The dam of her enforced passivity, built over a year of platitudes and veiled threats, was beginning to crack. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, her voice no longer the whisper of a victim, but the clear, cold tone of an adversary. This was the start. Sarah's courage became the first crack in the town's facade. Elias, using a burner phone he'd had the foresight to buy, contacted a former colleague at the Sentinel, a young, hungry reporter named Chloe who still believed in him. He fed her the story, piece by piece. The accidental death, the powerful family, the secret rite of the river's hush, his assault. It was all hearsay and circumstantial, but it was a compelling narrative. Chloe promised to start digging from her end, to look into the Blackwood family's finances and any other skeletons she could find. But the real change had to come from within Havenwood. With Sarah at his side, Elias went to see Alara again. Seeing Sarah's newfound resolve gave the older woman courage. "If she's willing to speak, then so am I," Alara declared, her eyes blazing. "I'll not let them call me a liar while a mother looks for justice." Their small alliance of three, the grieving mother, the outcast witch, and the broken journalist, began to cause ripples. They didn't march on the sheriff's office. Instead, they started to talk. Sarah went to the diner not to grieve but to ask questions. She would sit at the counter and speak Lily's name, asking people if they remembered her smile, her laugh. She would look them in the eye and say, "I don't believe my daughter was careless." Her quiet, relentless dignity was more powerful than any accusation. It forced people to see the human cost of their silence. The turning point came from an unexpected source. One of the boys who had been with Caleb during the assault, a lanky teenager named Sam, was riddled with guilt. His father had lost his job when the mill closed, and his family only survived because of the Blackwoods Chirisha charity that was, in reality, a leash. But seeing Elias's beaten face and Sarah Marsh's quiet suffering had eaten away at him. He met Elias secretly, by the town's old church. "We didn't mean for it to go that far," Sam stammered, his hands shaking. "Caleb, he gets a temper when he drinks." Lily showed up, see. She was crying. She said Caleb had been cruel to Alara, that he'd shot her cat with a pellet gun for fun a week before. She called him a monster in front of everyone. She wasn't scared of him. That made him furious. He shoved her hard, to shut her up. We all heard the crack when her head hit the rocks. Sam's confession was a floodgate. We were all terrified. Caleb's dad showed up with Sheriff Brody. They told us what to do. They told us to go home, to forget we ever saw anything. They said Lily had wandered off and it was a tragedy. They said if any of us spoke, our families would be ruined. They promised they'd take care of it. While Elias recorded Sam's confession on his phone, Chloe called back. Her own investigation had borne fruit. Arthur Blackwood was on the verge of bankruptcy. He'd been leveraging the family's land to secure a massive loan for a risky resort development deal, a deal that would have been scuttled by a scandal involving his son. The cover-up wasn't just about protecting Caleb. It was about protecting a 9-figure business deal. Elias now had everything. A witness to the original crime, a witness to the cover-up, a motive for the conspiracy, and a national newspaper ready to blow the story wide open. He published it all. He sent Chloe his recordings, his notes, his photos. The story hit the Sentinel's website the next morning with the headline, "Whispers by the Dark River, the small town that conspired to bury a child's murder." The effect on Havenwood was seismic. The outside world came crashing in. State police cruisers rolled into town, their sirens wailing, bypassing Sheriff Brody's office entirely. News vans with satellite dishes sprouted like mushrooms in the town square. The fortress of silence, breached from within and without, crumbled into dust. Elias's last act in Havenwood was to witness the arrest of Arthur and Caleb Blackwood. The patriarch was defiant to the end, spitting curses about loyalty and tradition. Caleb just looked like a scared, pathetic boy, the arrogance finally stripped away, leaving only the rotten core. Elias found Sarah Marsh standing by the riverbank, near the Weeping Willow. The water flowed on, dark and indifferent, but it no longer felt menacing. It was just a river again. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft. "You gave Lily her voice back." "She had it all along," Elias replied, looking at the water. "You just had to be brave enough to listen." He left Havenwood the next day, his car sputtering back towards a life he now had a chance to rebuild. He had the story of a lifetime, but it was more than that. He had arrived in Havenwood haunted by the ghost of his own failures. He left carrying the memory of a brave little girl who wasn't afraid to call a monster, and the community of women who had finally found the courage to do the same. The whispers by the dark river had not been silenced. They had become a roar that had washed the whole town clean.